Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum students. Hopefully you're all doing good and you are here with new chapter that is about the variety of life. You know very well that life is very diverse. It ranges from microscopic organisms to the macroscopic organisms like to the blue whale, etc. But how do we classify these organisms into various categories so that we might be able to explore the life very well? So here in this chapter we will discuss about the various forms of life, and we will briefly guide you about the classification system, what is the basis of this classification system, and how you categorize the organisms into various taxons, and how can you identify various organisms. We know that there are many systems of nomenclature. So the widely accepted nomenclature system, that is binomial nomenclature, we will also throw some light on that as well. So let's start our chapter. So you know that there are many species of organisms on this planet Earth. You have also observed many of them, like animals and plants, you know them. So let's start with them. There are 1.5 million species of animals discovered so far, and over half of a million of species of plants are known so far. So how can you recognize them, and how can you particularly study them? There should be a system that they must be classified into various groups, into various taxons. Then what is the basis of that classification system? To deal with the large collection of the dissimilar forms, we need a certain kind of a system so that you can easily classify them. So classification needs to be very genuine in this way. We can classify organisms in any way. Like you can classify the flowering plants according to their color, height, and their character as well. But this type of classification system is not meaningful, since it does not provide any information regarding the basic differences and the similarities among the individuals. So the point lies here that we need basic differences and similarities to classify the organisms on in various groups. So what is the basic key of classification? If you are asked in the examination, then you must highlight that the differences and the similarities, these are the two key points which give you the basis for the classification system, and that gives you a meaningful classification system. During the evolutionary histories, you know that organisms live in certain kind of environments, and they have to adapt themselves according to their environment. So in the evolutionary histories, organisms are very close to each other, and they are somewhat related to each other. However, some of the organisms which are more closely related than the other, like sparrows are more closely related to the pigeons as compared to the insects. So they should be placed in one category. So what is the basis for this classification? That we search for the relationships among the individuals. We search for that relationship, and mostly these are appeared in the form of the similarities. So, and similarities in what? Similarities in their form and structure. Biologists classify the organisms into various groups showing similarities based on their homologies. So there are certain kind of the criterions which should be followed in the terms of similarities. So what are those? Number one, we look up for the homologies. Homologies means their structures, the similarities in their structure. And then we look up for their biochemistry, that at biochemistry level, at molecular level, what kind of similarities you can find there. So it is also act as a very solid basic line for the classification system according to the similarities. Then we look up for the cells, and in cells we can say that there are various kinds of organelles, and organelles structure and their form and the appearance of the cells, etc. They also link up, and they also show the particular similarities of the organisms. And then that is the base of today's classification system, that is genetics, that on genetic level, on DNA level, how much organisms are similar to one another. Large groups are divided into smaller groups and up to the species level. What is a species actually? A species is basically a group of the natural population which can interbreed freely among themselves and produce the fertile offsprings, but are reproductively isolated from all other such groups in the nature. What is species? Actually, a group of the organisms that are placed at a certain time in a certain place, and they can reproduce with one another, and they can produce their offsprings, their next generation, that should be reproductively capable of producing the next generation as well. So we can say that that should be fertile, and these kind of the organism, or the group of the organisms, are mostly isolated from other such group of the organism present in the nature. uh, Here we use the term interbreeding, but we can't use the interbreeding a wholly solely criterion for the species recognition, because there are certain kind of the organisms which reproduce asexually. What about that? So we can say that the organism, the group of the organism, like which we are calling here as a species, these are independent evolutionary units. What is meant by that? This is called as such because they have distinct structural, they have their structural, ecological, and behavioral characteristics. If we dig up into a species, you can say you can find their structural, ecological, and behavioral characteristics, set of characteristics in a species that should be same for all the organisms of that particular species. So we can easily denote here that species are independent evolutionary units. These do not depend on other group of the organism. They have their own dependency on themselves. So these are independent in evolutionary pathway. So and different species do not exchange genes between them. We can see that we can say that and this point replaces the term interbreeding. That is not necessary for here. Anyways, next come to the groups, various groups. We will go from higher to the lower. We categorize organisms in the broader category in the kingdoms, and then the phyla, and then classes. Classes have orders, orders have families, and family contain genera, and genera contain species. So species form the base of this classification system. And if we go from the lower to the higher hierarchy, you can see here the species, similar species are placed in genera, and similar genera are placed in a family, and similar families are placed in an order, and similar orders are placed in a class, and similar classes are placed in phylas, and similar phylas are placed in kingdoms. And we have one more classification unit that is called domain, that was added later on, so it's not needed to mention it here. Species is the basic unit of classification. It lies at the base. It established the classification system because it acts as independent evolutionary unit due to its structural, ecological, and behavioral characteristics. Conversely speaking, organisms are generally grouped into the larger and much inclusive categories, which are called taxa, and each category is more general as compared to the categories below that. And the taxonomic categories from the species to the kingdom form a hierarchy. And here again you can see a chart in which you can see a hierarchy of classification from the kingdom to the species level of corn. Here you can see the biological classification of corn, and its botanical or scientific name is Z. maize. We will discuss in our next lecture about what does it mean Z. maize, and how does this nomenclature sounds. Anyways, we are here to look up the classification. So here you can see that okay, I should mark it with numerals, sorry. So here we go. We will start from the lower to the higher. Species, genus, family, order, class, division, and kingdom. And if we start from the kingdom, then again this follow up in the opposite direction. And here we go. The kingdom Plantae contains many divisions, many phylums, and among them one is Enthophyta, which is also known as Trichophyta, which contains many classes. Among them one is Angiospermi, and Angiospermi contain many orders, and one of the order which contains our plant, that is Poales, and Poales contain many families. Particularly, we're talking about the family which contains our corn Z maize, that is Poaceae, and that contains many genus, but we are looking for Z, and then Z contain many species, but we are looking for maize. So this is the classification system of Z maize. Members of lower category resemble more to one another than the members of the higher taxons, because the members of the genus, which for example, there are certain kind of species, say 1 2 3 4 5 6 in a genus, in a particular genus A, you can say, that resemble more to one another as compared to certain animals present in a certain order. So the smaller the category is, the more the resemblance of the organism you can find there. Hopefully that makes sense. That was all about for today's lesson. That was about the introduction of the classification system and various kind of the terminologies as well regarding the classification system. That was all for today's lecture. See you in the next lecture. Take care. Till then, Allah Hafiz.